Welcome back to the Cross Border Interview Podcast. We are live after the first and only to date federal election debate with all five of the major party leaders: the Liberals, Justin Trudeau; Conservatives, Erin O'Toole; NDP, Jagmeet Singh; Annamie for the Greens; and Yves-François Blanchet. I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I do apologize for the Bloc Quebecois. Today we are going to be sitting down, actually tonight, as it's after the debate, we are sitting down with representatives from the, I would say, three major parties here in Alberta: the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the NDP. So without further ado, I'm going to bring them on. I'm just going to do a quick round table just to introduce everyone here, so that way everyone knows who you are. For the Conservatives, we have returning guest, as always, Conservative Like Me podcast host Jennifer Sanford. Hello, Jen.
Hello, great to be here.
For the NDP, we have returning guest as well, Aidan Thoreau from the Fort Saskatchewan Sherwood Park NDP candidate. Well, Aidan Thoreau. So, Aidan, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
And last but not least, a newcomer to the show. I reached out to him on social media. Actually, he reached out to me after I put out a call. Mr. Robert Tremblay for the Liberal Party. He is a volunteer and organizer with the Sabrina Grover campaign down in Calgary Centre. Rob, thank you so much for doing this. And I do hope I pronounced your last name correctly.
Yep, that's awesome. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's jump into it because, like I said in the pre-interview, that we have about a half hour to kill here, and I want to make sure we get to as much things as possible. The first is we had the first and, like I said, only English debate. And I want to get your impressions on this. I will start with a pro at the podcast game, Miss Jen Sanford from the Conservative Like Me podcast. How did you feel about the format and the setup of this federal debate, Jen?
You know, I'm a big fan of the moderator. I think she, being a person outside of the Ottawa infrastructure, did a great job of trying to keep everything on track and brought a fresh perspective to it. So I think that that's something that the debate commission should look at moving forward: is how do you select someone who has almost an economist or an analytical mind with some experience in journalism. I really felt strongly that two things were a mismatch. The first was the journalists that were selected were far too combative. I have a high level of frustration for how they inserted themselves into the debate. I think that there is a big, wide difference between being part of the question answer infrastructure and holding leadership to account. And I don't think that that was well identified. And the other thing that I think really was a problem is that, in this country, we pride ourselves on being a marketplace of ideas. We had someone representing Quebec who talked about Quebec, and, like Yves-François Blanchet he's like my partner's ex-wife, really pretty to look at, but kind of a little bit psycho. So, I mean, it was great to have him there, but I do think we were missing Maxime Bernier. And while I understand the argument against giving the PPC a platform at a time when their numbers are rising and people are participating in their debates, I think it was a real missed opportunity to see his message polarized and allow people to really evaluate either what they're signing up to support or what's in their political infrastructure. So overall, those are my thoughts on how the debate came together.
What about yourself, Aidan? Jagmeet seemed to be stuck between Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau throughout the night. I think that was to his benefit because he was able to point back and forth. But for the format of the show, for the debate, I should say, it wasn't really a show, it was a debate. How did you feel that it went over?
Well, I mean, as far as political debates go, personally, I'm more of a fan of this kind of format of just long haul conversations. I've always considered you have 2 minutes to give your entire policy platform to be sort of the WWE equivalent of political engagement. It's not typically all that productive, in my opinion. It's more just, you want to see these guys running against each other, clash heads. With that said, yeah, tonight's wasn't the best. Even among that, didn't feel very productive. As Jen had said, it did feel like some of the journalists were being a little too combative, as if they wanted to be on the debate stage themselves. But yeah, it was still an exciting night. I'll say that. And yeah, looking forward to talking about it.
Rob, for those who had probably never tuned into a full-length debate before, this seemed like a shouting match at times. Did you find that this was beneficial to the Canadians who were potentially watching it? Or did you, like Jen and Aiden just alluded to there, found that the style and the format was very combative and it didn't do a service to Canadians?
Yeah, I think I have to follow Aiden. Like, I think the debate is I think it's better that Canadians watch the debate than not. But I think like Aiden's saying, I think a long form discussion I think is probably better suited to discussing out lots of the points of the platform. I think maybe an easy improvement. I don't know if the commission would pursue this, but I'm just splitting out different issues on different debates. So I know in the US, there's been lots of pushes for a climate debate. I think people, clearly care about inflation and cost of living. That I think I'm sure Jennifer would be on board with a debate on those issues. I would say as well, one thing I'll just kind of tack on is I've seen this I think the closing and opening statements has kind of fallen out of favor in lots of debates. And I found that I really missed the closing statements in these debates. Like, I think, of course, they're going to be canned responses, kind of, it's going to be spin, and the people are going to try to spin the debates how they will. But I think, I'm not a candidate in this election. I'm kind of a volunteer. I'm a coordinator on the campaign. And I think maybe the way I can view myself in the context of this conversation is kind of halfway between kind of a pro and like an average Canadian. And I think I can imagine an average Canadian watching the debate and just feeling like, bam, like, okay, that's it. It's done. And it was just a wash of everybody's platform, everybody's issues. And there was no closing statements for it to feel summarized for them. And honestly, that's kind of how I felt at the end of it. So
I totally agree with what Rob is saying here. And I think that there's a real salience to this message is that if you have complicated policy, which conservatives do, this was a really difficult format for you because it's like, let's talk about climate and you've got exactly 2 minutes to do it. It really works well for the parties that either have really sort of surface policy platforms or are still in development of a policy platform. And I think that speaks to the strength of Jagmeet Singh and Annamie Paul is that because they were a little bit underdeveloped on some of these issues, they could really hit those key messages harder. Erin O'Toole trying to explain the environmental plan in 2 minutes is a miserable experience. I don't even think he could do it in 2 hours. And so I think that that's where it gets complicated. But I will say that I was very nervous in the first 2 minutes when they asked those first round of questions, because Erin O'Toole's question was like, hey, you've got a problem within your party around vaccinations. We don't know where you stand on LGBTQS+. You have issues with climate change. And it was like a 5-part question. And it was to him and he had 30 seconds to respond. And I think that the Liberal question was like, hey, if you could be any kind of bird, what kind of bird would you be? Like, it was just kind of like a ridiculously asymmetrical way to start the debate. And I do think that the return from like the opening statement and the closing statement and then having more than one debate is so critical. It's so critical.
Well, it is 9 minutes into the live stream and we've already got our first debate. Rob, go ahead on this one.
Sorry, Rob.
It's not even really a point of debate, actually. I'm just curious to get Jen's take on this. Or should I say Jen or Jennifer?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, sorry. So the 5-point question, I agree that it's a complex question for Erin O'Toole to answer, but at the same time, do you think it's also an easier question because you can pick any piece and answer that question?
No, because the heart of the question, which should have been asked, was who's driving the bus in your party? Is it your fringe members or are you the leader of this party? What can Canadians trust when it comes to the CPC tent? Is it a circus tent or is it a leadership tent? And that's the question that should have been asked. But it was asked in such a complicated way that, and you even noticed he did actually have to pick and choose and say, like, I'm an ally for LGBTQS plus whatever. And then she had to then like reformat the question for him. And I just thought that was a really sort of scary way to start that off in terms of what I think was an asymmetrical question. I thought, oh no, how's this going to go? And then of course we all knew that Rosie Barton was going to come out and it was like, oh God, she's going to have her Trudeau pom-poms on. It's going to be such a problem here. So
we're not even not even 10 minutes in and we're already throwing Rosie Mary Barton under the bus. I want to throw it to Aiden here for a second because I want to talk about that style of that 30 to 45 second opening statement into a loaded question that while Jen may not think that the Liberals did get a loaded question, they all seem to have gotten some type of a hard-hitting question. I think Blanchet, Singh, Annamie Paul, and O'Toole and Trudeau all got some sort of a hard-hitting question in that opening statement. Do you think the 45-second answer to any question is possible? Because as a journalist, as a former journalist, someone who hates that 15-second soundbite, if you're talking for 45 seconds, you aren't able to talk about anything along with your opening statement. So what do you think about that, Aiden?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Again, that's why I'm more of a fan of this form of conversation when it comes to politics. Um, you know, I think with that first comment, I do think Jagmeet Singh came out with a pretty strong answer because it's a question that him and the NDP have had to contend with time and time again. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Which it is, and it's an important question. It's a question I don't see thrown very often enough, frankly, to the Conservatives, who promise corporate tax cuts, but don't have to explain which public programs they're going to cut to pay for them. But I do think Jagmeet Singh came out pretty strong. But yeah, like I don't think any party platform is going to really be properly explained in like a little 45-second soundbite. So again, and it's just more commentary on political debates in general, time specific to this one. Yeah, I would like to see a different format.
But I want to talk about that because you had everyone answer a 45-second opening statement, and then before we get into this, I should say all the leaders agreed to this. Well, their parties agreed to this format. They could have said no, right? The leaders could have said no. They all agreed to this format of 45 seconds and then a 2-minute between two people and then a 3-minute between three people. Very confusing on my part. I think it was a very big disservice from the debate commission to even set it up this way. I like the good old-fashioned 2008, 2006 when they were all sitting at a table and it was very relaxed. I know with COVID you can't do that, but this was a disservice. I will say that 2019's debate where they had 5 different main moderators was worse, but this one was bad. I want to talk, though, about the elephant in the room that Jen and I think Aiden did bring up at the beginning here. Blanchet, we're not going to spend a lot of time on him because, honestly, he is a non-issue, but did anyone else in this on the table, and this is an open question to anyone, did anyone else find that his participation should not ever be required at an English debate ever again moving forward?
No, I think he should be there because he is a federal party leader. I just believe that perhaps there should be a greater focus on the moderator to look at the fact of who can form government and how much should those people speak. And I you know me, I can't say that I think all the party leaders should be there and then we should take some away. So I'm linchpinned to my own message, but no, I think he should be there. But I think that there should have been a greater focus on if he cannot form government, then what is the point of this?
Rob,
I agree with
you
Jen.
sort of agreeing. So there, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Jen. I think Blanchet should be there, of course. Like, there's lots of Anglophone Quebecers who maybe would vote for and feel strongly about Quebec's sovereignty. I would say on his performance, though, I found I feel like I remember his 2019 performance a lot more strongly than this performance. I think I think I would rate him as the lowest. I felt like he was, English is obviously not his first language, but I found lots of times he was kind of swimming around in an answer and I wasn't quite sure where he was going, versus I remember him being very sharp and very kind of saucy in 2019. And I don't think I got that this time.
And he was on fire last night in the French debate. Like, there's a clear,
agreed.
I'm lamenting the dismal performance of Erin O'Toole last night. There's something so important about what is your dominant language and how can you communicate in that language. Like Blanchet was very strong last night in terms of holding Trudeau to account. And but tonight it was, what a mess.
Mm-hmm. But he was strong in 2019. Like, do you remember?
Yeah, for sure.
Aiden, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with my other two fellow panelists here. I think if you're a federal party leader and you meet the requirements to make a debate, you have representation in Parliament. I mean, that's what was different about Maxime Bernier this time is there is no PPC seat. But if you meet those requirements, by all means, you should be included in the debate. And I think it's good that we do have a French and English one. It's we have two national languages. I think it is important for leaders to be fluent in both of them to make sure we're communicating to all Canadians equally. But it is weird seeing Blanchet. I'm mispronouncing his name. Forgive me, but you have a federal debate, a federal election, where all the leaders are supposed to be accountable to all Canadians, and you just have one who essentially uses provincial politics rhetoric because his party only runs candidates in one province. So he is sort of an elephant in the room, but I don't think he should be barred from participating.
Now, the debate night was set into 5 different categories, and I want to read them here before we start going line by line here. Leadership and accountability, climate, reconciliation, affordability, and COVID-19. I might have got them in mixed order there, but those are the top 5 topics of the night. While I followed, I would say 2 out of the 3 panelists here, I have now started to follow Rob, and I'm looking forward to seeing his Twitter exchanges and Twitter knowledge. I do know that Jen was upset that foreign policy wasn't on the one of these topics, but it did get brought up in the first, I would say, 20 minutes, and it was brought up in a very good fashion because the moderator did hold everyone to account there. I want to talk about that area for a second before we move on to climate, leadership and accountability. How did you find that your leaders and your party, the leaders of your parties that you're here representing, did on this issue? And then we'll talk about where you believe your party challengers fell down. So, Jen, on Erin O'Toole's performance on accountability and leadership, do you believe that he was able to convey to the Canadians that he is the leader for the next 4 years or 18 months or however long the next term of office is going to be?
So listen, Erin O'Toole's got to find that sweet spot between decorum and the angry politician. And everybody thinks that there are these moments where he needs to stay on the decorum side. But I think in the leadership and accountability portion, there was an opportunity for him to go a little more on the angry politician side, not all the way, because I don't think we want to see that kind of leadership from the Conservatives anymore. But I thought on the issue of Afghanistan, it was not enough. It was not enough. He needed to rail on the Prime Minister on Afghanistan. That is a bigger issue to Canadians than I think anyone is giving it credit for. He left Canadians behind. And why it was like, you can see how mad I am. And I just feel so strongly that O'Toole, as the only potential leader that has a military experience since Lester B. Pearson in World War I, this was his opportunity to say, this is not, I feel disheartened at what happened. I feel they had the notice. They knew what they were doing. Get the people out of there. And I think I hearken back to last night's French language debate when one of the participants asked the question of, my sister's been left behind. This isn't a hypothetical now. This is my family. What are you going to do? I think he needed to push much, much, much harder. The silver lining to that is I think he hit it perfectly on China. When the question was asked about the 2 Michaels, I was very pleased to see it be asked in this section. And I think O'Toole did a great job of holding the Prime Minister to account. I felt when Trudeau said, we can't just vote, we can't just throw tomatoes at the party. I think O'Toole should have pressed even harder and said, then what do you do? What do you do? What do the next 100 days do? Tell me how you're going to get these 2 men home. Tell us all right now and hold him to it. Like really stick him into the point. And I think that that's where O'Toole needs to come harder on these issues, is where there's real people involved. It's a pragmatic issue. You cannot fall on key messages and your laurels. You need to say, what are the action plan steps? And I think that's the kind of debate that I wanted from tonight. So I think the leadership and accountability section was O'Toole's strongest section. And I'm disappointed that it came first because I think it sort of slid downhill from there for him.
Rob, I'm going to let you respond to that, and then I'll ask the follow-up question. How did you find that Justin Trudeau did on that issue? And then we'll throw to Aiden after my next follow-up question with Rob.
For sure. So I think like the way I usually view leaders debates is I'll view them kind of in context of, where all the leaders, what are their vulnerabilities, how are they maybe in the polls in the horse race. And I think for this section, Trudeau being the incumbent Prime Minister, if you have a section on leadership and accountability, Trudeau has much more of a record to wear than the rest of the leaders. So I think I agree with Jen. I think as someone who spent a lot of the time at the doors of this election, I think a lot of Canadians do care about Afghanistan and they do care a lot about the issue. That being said, I think where Jen's saying that she wished she saw more out of O'Toole on what he would have done differently and, what do the next 100 days look like? How are you going to get more people out of Afghanistan? I think all the leaders are hard pressed to do that because I don't think it's something that really comes down along partisan lines. Like ultimately, there's the Canadian military that is responsible for a lot of this. The PM isn't as active in it. Maybe I'm waiting a little bit outside my area of expertise here, but at the end of the day, I think it's easy to criticize on this issue, but it's tough to come up with alternative solutions, and I think that's where O'Toole found difficulty. And I think, frankly, any of the leaders, including Trudeau, I think would have difficulty.
I want to follow up on that because in the very first 20 minutes, Jen, I'll let you respond after Aiden talks here. In the first 20 minutes, I would say that the first blood was drawn with Annamie Paul and Justin Trudeau going at it around caucus discipline. Justin Trudeau did throw caucus discipline back into Annamie's, I want to say face, but it is what it is. Did this do what it needed to be done to win over those soft Green supporters who are looking for a new home? Because while we don't have a Green Party representative on the line right now, I want to know the Greens are looking for a home right now because the disarray that the party is in. Did Justin Trudeau do a service by getting those Greens to come to him in that exchange? Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was just going to ask. So I think the answer is a little bit nuanced. So I think the answer is on the clapback where Trudeau commented on caucus management. I don't think that is what's going to bring Greens to the Liberal Party. I think the Liberals' solid climate plan is what's going to bring Greens over. I think $10 a day childcare is what's going to bring Greens over. But I think what Trudeau said on caucus management, what it really served to do is it served to just immediately blunt any damage that came from Annamie right before calling Trudeau a fake feminist. So I think right there, that kind of the sort of barb for barb neutralized it. I think, but where Greens that are looking for a home are going to find solace in the Liberal Party is, like I said, with the climate plan and programs like $10 a day childcare.
Aiden, how about yourself on the leadership and accountability? I know that Jagmeet Singh did bring up the name, and Annamie Paul did bring up the name of the very first female Attorney General, Indigenous Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Was this the right move when Annamie Paul was bringing it up already, and he could have pivoted to another topic about accountability and leadership, Aiden?
I think it's a fair point to raise. I mean, SNC Lavalin was, my gosh, you go back a couple years. I mean, that was just the biggest story. I do wish, I do think Paul had already brought it up. I think there were other things to talk about. It's a pretty broad issue, and there's a lot to criticize Mr. Trudeau on, and I think a lot to distinguish Jagmeet from him. When in the issue, part of the topic ended up being about foreign policy. And, like Jen, I kind of wish it would have been, that could have expanded on that, dug into foreign policy a little bit more from the party platforms. For instance, I mean, Jagmeet had brought up the point that, as far as the Afghanistan situation, frankly, Mr. Trudeau didn't need to call this election. Is one of the many reasons we didn't need to have this election right now. But I wish he could have gotten a little bit more into some of the NDP's foreign policy proposals. He never gets to talk about that. So, for instance, you look at the issue with Saudi Arabia and the human rights abuses in Yemen. The NDP is the only party that's committed to ceasing the exports of Canadian arms to Saudi Arabia until that comes to an end. That even we saw down south in the States, America has already cut off their exports. So I think, if the NDP could have talked about some issues like that and some of their plan, that would have been a little nice, in my opinion. But yeah, no, it's...
I do know that Jagmeet Singh did bring up the fact that Trudeau was selling arms to Saudi Arabia as well, and this was an area that he took a little heat from. Jagmeet did get his punches in there. Well, they probably weren't a knockout blow. They did get a few punches in there. I do want to throw it over to Jen here because she has been rolling her eyes left, right, and center. So, Jen, what would you like to say on this before I do move on to the next topic? Because we are 20 minutes in and we've only got to one topic. So let's talk.
When you're like, this is a half an hour, I was like, this is not a half an hour. I just think that there were a bunch of tight corners there at the end when we started to cross the divide between foreign policy and trying to shove it under leadership and accountability. Like, I was at the UN for the meeting that the Human Rights Commission had. And when the president, Michelle Bachelet, talked about, this will not be something that the United Nations can address. This is something that every nation needs to address. And then every nation had the opportunity to speak, and Canada sounded ridiculous. And I just thought, no, we do need national leadership on this issue, and we are not getting that national leadership. And I do think it's important that all the leaders held him accountable to that standard. That's my piece on Afghanistan. I do want to wrap around to the piece about Jody Raybould Wilson. I was saying to a friend of mine, if you thought everyone was going to talk about Stephen Harper, no, everybody's talking about Jody Raybould Wilson. And I think you had to get in your Jody Wilson Raybould talking points because we do have this book coming out next week. You're going to want to be part of the ebb and flow of what's going to come out next week. It's going to be a rough week for the Liberal Party, and it would be beholden on the Conservatives and the NDP to say this speaks to the character of this leadership. And so I think it's sort of those preemptive blows that we're trying to make. But I will say, I do think the credibility of this section does absolutely go to Annamie Paul. And I think Trudeau choosing to take a swipe at her around, I won't take your recommendation on caucus management. I think him taking, and I hate to say this as a woman, but him taking a really hard swipe, probably the hardest swipe of the night at the only female on that panel, that's going to be tough for him. That's not going to play out the way he thinks it's going to play out.
I just want to jump in real quick and just say, I think I do disagree with that. Like, I think basically what I already said, like, I think my experience watching it, and, I guess, like, let's check the bias here, like straight white male, but I guess watching that myself, and again, maybe putting myself in context as, someone who's politically involved, but not necessarily a pro, to me, like, immediately it just seemed like tit for tat on that. And I think a lot of people will view it that way. I think I agree, like, maybe it could be cut up in an unfavorable way, but I think in context in the debate, I think if you just let what Annamie said lie, like, I think that's a lot worse for Trudeau.
Yeah, no, I don't think you let it lie, but I think he had a lot of choices around. This is like, pivot out then. This is the type of leadership I've exhibited. But instead of taking a backswipe, it's so undue character. It's so undue character for him. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it.
To me, I think pivoting out would have felt like letting it lie. I guess that's where
maybe.
I'm trying to get at. But,
maybe.
Yeah.
Aiden, do you want to jump in here for your last word on this segment before we move into an area that probably Erin O'Toole probably did not want to talk about this debate?
Yeah, I mean, so, obviously Trudeau's swipe at her about caucus management was in reference to the issue with the Green Party, the inner power struggle they've been having with the, this party executive, like, trying to revoke her leadership, trying to call a leadership review, but then that didn't happen. So they tried to take her to court to revoke her membership, but that wouldn't have still removed her as leader, and they're spending the party's money to fight the leader. It's weird. Yeah, that was I did think that was a bit of a low blow on Trudeau's part. But I mean, I don't think it's, we're talking about party, discipline here. It's one thing that came up with O'Toole, one thing that came up with Paul. It's not irrelevant either, how party leaders, how their own caucus is managing, because that's, if they were to form government, that's, how is this caucus going to work together for Canadians?
Just to add it to Aiden too, I think like a lot of what that was in reference to was Janika Akwin leaving from Fredericton.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Let's talk about the climate in the room. It got a little hot when we started talking about climate change, and Trudeau did have probably one of his best performances of the night during this exchange with Erin O'Toole. We'll start with you, Rob. How did you find Mr. Trudeau handled the issues around climate change? And then we'll go to Aiden, then we'll jump to Jen afterwards. So let's talk about climate change. Did Justin Trudeau do what he needed to do when it came to addressing climate change and his government's actions on the issue?
Yeah, frankly, I think so. I think, like I was talking with a friend while I was watching the debate, and climate's an issue that I'd say like I'm most focused on as a person, and I think a lot of it, I would say like, okay, here's the question, here's where I think the answer should be, and I think Trudeau in general was kind of on message with where I think I should be, not to make myself sound self-important, but I think in general Trudeau has to kind of set the frame as I alone can solve this problem. You know, the NDP and the Greens, they have good targets, but they don't have the chops to meet them. And the Conservatives are going back to the Harper targets, and the policy they have also doesn't have the chops to meet those targets. And I think he was able to adequately represent that, I think.
Aiden, I want to talk about Singh for a second because he was directly asked this question, and I want to see if you can answer it. If not, then we will hopefully be able to get the NDP's answer on this in a short period. Northern Gateway. Where does the NDP stand on this? Because it was asked directly to him, and there was a very big pivot from Mr. Singh on this issue. So do you know where your party stands on this, and are you advocating for the continuation of Northern Gateway?
Jagmeet actually in the past did say he wasn't against the construction of Northern Gateway as a means of economic development. There is a fact of the matter, and this is one of the things I talk about. It's look, we got to transition away from renewable energies, and that's the heart of the NDP's plan. But it's not going to happen overnight. And what the things we can do is, and this is sort of what I talk to people about at the doors, is the projects we invest in, like with Jason Kenney, blowing all that money on Keystone XL on a gamble that Donald Trump would be reelected. Now, that's not the kind of investments we want to be making. But moving forward, what matters and what the NDP is focused on is moving forward. I know that sounds like a pivot, but in their plan to create hundreds of thousands of renewable energy jobs in the next 4 years, invest in renewable energy industries, diversify our economy, and really emphasizing that diversification isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. But to go back to it, yes, no, Jagmeet has spoken on that before.
Awesome, thank you.
Can I just ask a question real quick? Just on Northern Gateway. Yeah, so my understanding on the history of Northern Gateway is that Northern Gateway was originally it was overturned on consultation, and then it was just never really along with kind of the tanker ban, it was just never really reconsidered by private business to take on. So I've seen a couple announcements on Northern Gateway, but frankly, I've been very focused on kind of ground game this election. Is anybody proposing to take back Northern Gateway, or is this just kind of people are talking about it?
Jen,
any private companies, I should say.
I don't know about private companies. Jen might be able to answer on the Erin O'Toole front, but I've not seen anything massive come out from any party saying that they're willing to sell it back to any private organization.
Enbridge isn't back at the table, right?
No, I don't think so.
To my knowledge, no.
So it is still a government pipeline. Miss Sanford, you know where I'm going to hit you. You know where I'm about to hit you here. 2015, I ran for the Liberals in Northern Alberta. The idea of a price on carbon coming out of a conservative mouth would flip every conservative on their teeth. I see the other two gentlemen nodding their heads, so they know where I'm coming from. Mr. O'Toole said that in April, because he likes to talk about his April plan, he announced a price on carbon. Does this hurt the Conservatives when it comes to winning seats or potentially bringing out their vote in Alberta and Saskatchewan?
No. What hurts them is that they have a plan they can't explain. That's what hurts them, is that this conservative plan is difficult to explain. So it's so susceptible to the key messages that Rob just swung out here on this podcast that I'm just going to try to deal with that. But I think what really harms it here is that they can't get it down into the right mechanisms to talk about it meaningfully. So the first thing is that, and this, the Conservatives know better than this, is if you do not answer the question of who is in control in your party, you can never talk about anything else. And you saw it reappear when the Prime Minister said, how can you possibly be a leader in climate change when the people inside of your own tent don't believe that climate change is real? The fact that he let that lie will bug me. It will wake me up in the night and will bug me, because there is a climate plan from this party. And the way that this climate plan finds salience is to start to use language like, why does the government have to do everything? We have to stop deciding that we have to choose between the economy and the environment. The value here is that our climate plan gives market stability and gives the market something to do in the participatory action to address climate change. It involves everybody along. Instead, he deferred into that very dangerous Western message of, I know you work for oil and gas. I'm not going to make you suffer. You'll be part of the reanimation. And that message is going to be trouble for him in the East, where he needs those messages to be different. So when you watch him in these next 2 days, it's going to be such a dangerous pitfall that he's going to seem like he's talking out of both sides of his mouth now, because he's going to have to pivot the message slightly in the East and slightly in the West. And that is an unnecessary beast to have to wrestle down, because the right message was, we have a plan that actually moves our carbon pricing into the market. This isn't a circle jerk of moving money from a price on pollution and back into the hands of people while carbon emissions continue to raise. I see Rob shifts everywhere, but
everyone's raising their hands. We will. I have to follow up with that, but I'm going to let Rob explain. Then Aiden.
But just wait. Before Rob does this, I think it's important to remember that I am not the architect of the conservative climate plan. I work in conservation. The environmental movement is my business. This is not what I would have chosen for them. I wanted them far more focused on natural solutions. I wanted them far more focused on capturing carbon at the source and measurement. And so this plan already isn't my favorite, but the way in which this plan was explained tonight did them no service. So let's just to put a capture on that, because I don't want to seem like I'm the ambassador of this plan. This isn't my favorite plan for them.
Okay, Rob, let's go. What do you want to follow up on that one?
I sympathize with Jen, because I think, it's a difficult plan to defend. I think, as someone from Alberta, I value like a lot of conservative principles. I think one of the principles I value is simplicity, and kind of, I think for me, like a personal evolution in my politics has been like, I've always valued small government. And I think for me, an evolution has been that I think small government doesn't have to necessarily mean just small spending, but I think it can mean simple policy. And I think Jen says, small government's valuable. Why does a small government party producing a carbon tax, which is telling me what I can spend my money on from my carbon tax on? Like, why do I need the government to tell me what my eligible low carbon savings dollars can go to? Like, to me, this is just a carbon tax with extra strings attached, extra bureaucracy, extra infrastructure needed. And I don't know, like, it's weird, because I think I can see a lot of better conservative options for a carbon tax. Like, if you look at the BC Liberals, they had a revenue neutral carbon tax in 2007. I think that would have been a way easier solution. Just say, hey, we're going to stop the wealth redistribution. That's something that's a common conservative attack of the Liberal carbon tax. And they could have just said, you know what, we're just going to cut income taxes instead. And that would have been very easy, you wouldn't need to be explaining it. If you're explaining, you're losing, and it would have been no problems for them.
I'm well on the record for advocating for exactly that on my podcast.
Yeah, and
so
I think
we're pretty.
I'm sure we agree on these issues. But to me, like, it's strange, because now, like, if I'm imagining myself as a conservative voter, the Liberal carbon tax to me is the most conservative carbon policy or carbon pricing policy. So, and I'm supportive of it, like, to be clear, but.
Aiden, I want to jump in with you here for a second, because Jagmeet Singh did hit Mr. Trudeau numerous times about meeting targets. He said that the Liberals have not met a target that they have implemented. And then Mr. Trudeau did say, well, our targets are 2030, and that's 9 years away from here. But you did attack him. Mr. Singh did attack. Did it land? Did it do what it needed to do when it came to letting people know that the Liberals haven't been the best on the environmental record?
Well, I mean, this was in terms of, just rhetorically, did it meet where it hit to hit? It was kind of hard for anything anybody said to really hit where it needed to hit with people, because everyone was talking over each other. The moderators were jumping in. But if we could just pretend that we had a nice, happy debate where people weren't interrupting each other, I would think that's a good point to make. We've seen, we keep setting these targets, but we're not but we're not seeing the realistic actions going to be taken to meet them. So the NDP has put forward the exact same targets as the Liberals, but a more ambitious plan to actually meet them. And that's the key distinction. That was the distinction Mr. Singh needed to draw, and I think he did, do a good job. I mean, we did see a little return of the. His line in 2019 debate, the Mr. Delay, Mr. Deny line. He didn't
That was a
use it
good line.
That is, yeah.
So I thought, because you had to distinguish yourself both from Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole there, and I do think he did just that.
I wanted to open that up to anyone who wants to add anything into this before I do move on, but I'm going to ask the question to Jen here just to get her on record, because I love having her on record so I can win a few steak dinners from her from time to time. Mr. O'Toole during the debate said that he has targets that he is going to meet. They are going to be met because they are lower than the current Liberal government's targets.
They're teeny tiny.
They're teeny tiny. Does this even play well anywhere? Okay, I can meet a target if I set a target like at the bottom of the bar. Like, where was his idea of setting targets so low so he can just say that he's met them? Is that what he was going for there?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't wasn't my favorite line of thinking. I think that there was a far better attack dog there to talk about the Liberals. Like, how did it go planting all those trees? Did you get one done? Like, I just think that there was a better attack dog strategy there than there was being like, we've never. I think it was really dangerous for him to say you've never set a target. I think conservatives know that the Liberal climate plan is a strong plan. I think hitting it on the idea of large federal oversight. Why can't the provinces decide what their carbon taxation is? We disagree. We'll challenge the Supreme Court ruling, blah, blah, blah. I think talking about, giving the market something to do to make this an economic driver, not having to decide between the economy and the environment. I think that was the line of messaging. The minute he started to say, like, this man's never set any targets, I was just like, no, because your targets are so crap. So I mean, he earned it, and Singh did a great job of pointing it out.
I want to move on if no one else has anything else, because like I said, I'm just cautious.
I've got one more thing.
Go for it, Rob. And then we'll end on Aiden again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just something I'll just, constructive criticism, I think, towards Mr. Trudeau and my own party. I think one thing I would have liked to have seen emphasized more is, the Liberals, Trudeau, like, they took real heat for bringing in the price on carbon. Like, that was a prolonged, like, borderline cultural war battle that they took on. And I think,
still is.
It still is. I would say, like, to me, like, now that the Conservatives have their own, like, kind of sort of price on carbon, like, they, to me, like, we're moving past it. And I think that's a good thing. But I think, like, an easy response that I would have liked to have seen more in response to critiques from the NDP that the Liberals haven't done anything. They've done a lot to pull the Canadian public over towards carbon pricing being just, like, that's what we do to fight climate change. And that wasn't the case in 2015. And I think taking that political heat is something that wasn't emphasized, and I would have liked to have seen that.
Before I go to Aiden here, I just want to say, if we had our leaders raise their hands when they wanted to talk during the debate, it would have been so much better. Aiden, go ahead.
Everybody would have just had their hand raised the whole time.
I would have been okay with that. Aiden, last word for you before we move on to Indigenous. Okay, the moderator will start over talking people. Aiden, go ahead.
I'll make this quick. Because we talked a bit about the carbon tax. I didn't really get a chance to get my little 2 cents in, so I thought I'd just throw that in there. Of course, we saw the Alberta NDP back in the day now, we can say, implemented a provincial carbon tax before the feds brought theirs in. And so I think I think one strength for Mr. Singh would be to kind of talk about, relate that to, it was the Alberta NDP that did that well before the Liberals. And they had a provincial carbon tax where, it was the government of Alberta controlled how the retained money collected was spent instead of a federal one. Mr. Kenney ran in the last provincial election on getting rid of it, knowing full well that the feds had said any province that didn't have a provincial carbon tax would be given a federal one. And so now we have a federal one controlled by Ottawa. So I think, we gain a bit of, Mr. Singh might gain a bit of advantage by, not being afraid to give a, thumbs up to his friend Rachel Notley.
Buddies, really though. Point. They're not really buddies. Those two were never really buddies. Let's be honest.
I'm just cautious of
I
time
think it's a
here.
great messaging strategy, though.
Yeah.
I'm just cautious of time here, and I just want to make sure, Rob, I know we did say 45 minutes, and we just hit that 45-minute mark. Are you comfortable staying for a little bit longer talking about this? Because your input has been fabulous. Let's start with Aiden on the next topic, which was reconciliation. Mr. Singh did hammer, and I keep on saying that because I felt it was a good attack line about bringing children to court, bringing Indigenous children to court. So Aiden, I want to start with you. How did you feel that Mr. Singh did during this this portion of the debate? Because this is a topic that should have been talked about a lot more, in my opinion, because it is the topic of discussion with the residential school discoveries that we are finding every day, even though it's not making national news. But on your party's leadership, how did you feel that Mr. Singh did?
Well, I think, because as far as the NDP's messaging this election has been, as on the subject of reconciliation has been, look, symbols are lovely, but we need proper action. We need to actually get things done for these communities. And so that's kind of one of the things he's been hammering away at. So he had a great line where he pointed out, look, Mr. Trudeau will take a knee, but at the same time, as he's doing that, public funds are being spent on fighting Indigenous kids in court. CBC reported in 2020 that over $3 million had been spent in public funds since 2013 on fighting these kids in court. I think he did a good job. I think, really hammering away at that. And also bringing up, talking about the clean water issue. I mean, my goodness, like this was supposed to be solved by this year was the promise. But they underfunded their budget and for it. And as a result, we still have 61 Indigenous communities still not having clean drinking water. I mean, this is an important issue because it's essentially our equivalent of the Flint, Michigan water crisis down south in the States. And so, all that to say, I think Jagmeet did a good job.
I think him bringing up the idea of, we'll go to you next here, Jen, but I just want to bring this in. I do believe that bringing up the idea of boil water still being an issue in 2021 was a smart move, and any leader should be doing their damn well best to make sure this is not an issue at the next election. Ms. Sanford, I have a question before you answer your last question. During the debate, Mr. O'Toole said that he would raise the flag at Parliament Hill at the Peace Tower to full mass on September 3rd, the Truth and Reconciliation Day. For me, when I was watching, I sort of had to gasp for a second, because usually you would lower the flag on half mast for a day like that. Was this a fumble on his part, or was this just me overthinking the issue? You're muted here for a second. I think you've just unplugged yourself. This is the great thing about being live. Things can happen like this.
Sorry. Everybody's dream. The Conservative's been muted. So I do think he meant to say lower. I think he meant to say lower. I'm not touching that because I think he meant to say lower. I think it was just a gaffe, and I'm sure it'll be corrected now. But back to what Aiden was saying, I don't believe that, with respect, I don't believe that the water crisis is the same as the Flint, Michigan crisis. I believe it's far worse. I believe it is just like the residential school problem, crisis, epidemic, genocide, whatever word is culturally appropriate, that we have in our past. I think that this is the only line that we have here, is that the tragedy that has become of these First Nations and Indigenous communities is being replicated with generations that do not have clean water in a nation which is known for water. And where I think every political party, I think we have to step away from political representation here and recognize that there is a moment in every debate where a leader has an opportunity to make a hook. to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this on the first day, or I'm going to do this in the first 100 days. And every political leader had the opportunity to say, in the first 100 days of my leadership, when I'm the prime minister, we will have this dealt with. We will either bring in private business to oversee this. We will either strike a deal with these First Nations communities to let them own this from their own financial point of view, or I will go in there myself and dig a ditch. And none of them took it. And I think that that says a lot about the amount of puffery and useless rhetoric that we will have about our First Nations communities. But when there's an opportunity to make a tangible commitment that the people of Canada, all of us as allies now, could hold a prime minister to, nobody took it. And that is disappointing to me as a conservative. It's disappointing to me as a Canadian.
Rob, your follow-up on that?
Yeah, for sure. I just say, so in my day job, I design and build transmission lines. And as someone who builds infrastructure kind of in northern communities and specifically in northwestern Ontario, where I think a lot of these remaining communities exist, I think the reason, frankly, why none of the other leaders made that 100 days commitment, I think, although rhetorically would be very powerful, and I think a move in the right direction, I think building infrastructure in the north is really hard. Like if you need a water treatment plant and you need to power that treatment plant, with what infrastructure, if you're 1,000 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, like it's going to be quite difficult. So I think, it's a difficult issue for any government to deal with. But at the end of the day, like I think bureaucrats are likely to overestimate how fast this can be dealt with, and I think that's been a problem for the Liberals, and I think it would be a problem for most governments, frankly.
So maybe actually Rob is making my point, because I would argue that maybe this is not a job for bureaucrats. Maybe this is a job for the market to come in and have an opportunity to do that. We are a country of engineers. We're also a country that figured out how to pull crude oil out of Fort McMurray in 40 or 50 below weather. We can figure this out.
Development and government subsidies.
Yeah, we can figure it out. We can figure this out.
I'm up to hear like the conservative proposal for private management. Does that exist, Jen?
No, but it can.
Okay.
With
what are we talking about then?
It's
Jen
been,
2023 right here.
Yeah, Jen 2020.
That's right.
Before Jen answers, I'm going to let Aiden jump in here because he's raised his hand twice because we're following the raise the hand process. Aiden, go for it.
One of the key things about the NDP's pointed out, and I think Jagmeet has consistently hammered away in this messaging on the campaign, is look, it's an issue of resources and how much resources we're willing to put towards this. That was a few years ago. He was asked, of course, a question by a journalist. That's a lot of money you're proposing we make. It's like, he said, well, look, if it was Edmonton, if it was Toronto, if it was Vancouver that didn't have clean drinking water, we wouldn't be talking about the price tag. We would be talking about getting Canadians drinking water. And so, and the fact of the matter is the parliamentary budget officer had warned the Liberals they were underfunding their promise by a large amount of money. And so it comes down to a matter of resources. And, and this is what the NDP is arguing that we need to put forward. And so, yeah, I think Jagmeet made a good splash there.
I want to ask this question because it was raised during the debate, and I think every single leader except Justin Trudeau pivoted from the question that was asked, and that is around the Indian Act. Would you overturn the Indian Act? And Justin Trudeau he was the first one asked, and he said, yes, we would overturn it, and we would sit down with communities. He said communities. I'm not saying communities, but Indigenous leaders, and redraft other templates or other works that would replace the Indian Act. Did Erin O'Toole, did Jagmeet Singh, and please correct me if I'm wrong here because my mind wasn't completely focused because I had a dog peeing on me at the time. I do apologize for that. Did Erin O'Toole or Jagmeet Singh say anything along the lines of that? Yes, I have new puppies in the house, so they did pee on me. So Jagmeet Singh, so let's start with Aiden. Did Jagmeet Singh say something about the Indian Act, about overturning it, or was it addressed to everyone? I don't remember, and please correct me if I'm wrong here.
Gosh, this is, I wish I had taken notes like you guys did. So I'm afraid I can't reach any quotes.
Nope. Jen, how about yourself? Did Erin O'Toole say anything about that?
I think there was like Trudeau gave the most in-depth answer, but everybody talked about how there needed to be refinement to it. But I find that certainly my leader, Erin O'Toole's answer was quite loose, and unstructured. And I was actually quite surprised that they went into such a level of detail in that. So I shouldn't have been surprised. Like reconciliation was one of the 5 categories, but certainly wasn't as well structured as Trudeau's would be. But the Indigenous community represents a very interesting vote. I think we'll all be watching on September 20th to see how that vote plays out. I think that they are a group without a place to belong right now. So, they certainly deserved better from all of the leaders in the debate this evening.
The one area I want to talk about before moving on here is the exchange between Annamie Paul and Yves-François Blanchet, where she basically said...
Yves-François Blanchet.
Sure, okay, sure. But he's not winning my vote here in Alberta, okay? But
I don't think you can vote for him.
They did talk about racism and systematic racism. Miss Paul did basically hand the truck over to Mr. Blanchet by basically saying, hey, if you want to sit down, I'd be happy to do that. And it did seem like those two wanted to basically go all out on each other. Was I the only one who read into that way, or was this the overwhelming Annamie Paul taking a hit at the Bloc Quebecois there? Anyone want to jump in on that one? Go, Aiden.
I'll say this quickly. I think definitely this kind of ties back to what I was first saying, which is, if we wanted to talk about systemic racism and injustice, and this is something that, Annamie Paul and many of the others, Jagmeet Singh, spent a good chunk of his life fighting. It's something they could talk about. So I suppose the generous interpretation of her comment there would be, hey, we could sit down later and to have an in-depth conversation about this. That is the generous interpretation, I know, but that's kind of the format I would prefer. So I guess that hit kind of a sweet spot for me. But I'll pass it over to Jen or to Rob.
Jen, go for it.
Well, I think, to be fair, like I'm in Calgary right now, so I'm in this hometown of Madame Premier, and if Sarah Elder doesn't put on a t-shirt, not an insult, just an opportunity to educate yourself on a shirt tomorrow, I don't even know what I'm doing with my life.
Whoa, we can do that for the Cross Border Interview podcast. We could be making some money here, girl.
No way. I guarantee you she'll have an email tomorrow at some point. I thought that was a stunning blow to him. And he really did have he didn't really have a structured response to that. He was just sort of like, oh my God, it's getting off the rails. But I do think it was a stunning blow from I think an individual from the Greens who did an outstanding job of debating this evening.
To be fair to Blanchet, I don't think he had a structured response to lots of the questions. But...
That, you know what, I'll concur with that also.
Wow, we look at the agreements here, guys. It's great.
They've always said that Quebec brings people together, and we're all together. That was not good.
Affordability was the last major topic before we get into COVID-19, but affordability, I'm going to start with Rob here because I've started with everyone else and now we're getting with Rob. Rob, I want to talk about affordability. The inflation was a topic of discussion during this debate. Did Mr. Trudeau answer the questions around why things are rising to the senior from, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say Sudbury, Ontario, around why? No, she was the senior. Oh my God.
Did I remember right? The inflation question was yesterday in the French debate.
Was there?
But
was there
maybe I missed it tonight.
Yeah. It was this evening as well. They asked questions. Okay. It was under the section of affordability.
Okay, we'll start with Jen then, if you missed it then. So that way I'm not asking if you missed it. You missed it, but I'll
still speak towards inflation, but I might have just missed the exact.
But Mr. O'Toole did talk about inflation. I think he was the first one who brought it up. Jen, was this a point of potentially hitting Mr. Trudeau over the monetary policy that he doesn't think about?
Yeah, not hard enough. This is another example where I just don't think Erin O'Toole took it far enough, especially at this point in the debate, when at that point Jagmeet Singh had really sort of taken the gloves off, and so had Annamie Paul. I felt that there was still too much refinement from Erin O'Toole. And let me be clear, like I don't want him to be like unglued, but I do think that this was an opportunity for him to say, everybody stop, because on the issue of the economy and on affordability, this is where conservatives come to play. So everybody back up for a minute. He had to talk about the State of the Union. He had to talk about how many calling cards there are that inflation is going to be the greatest threat to our well-being as citizens in the next 2 to 5 years. And it is not tomorrow's problem, it is today's problem. And I think he had a responsibility to first really sort of lay the State of the Union on inflation, explain inflation to a lot of young voters who may or may not have been listening to the debate this evening, and then really, really talk about how imperative it is to have an economically driven focus on inflation, and to really hammer home the fact that there is an unchecked process by the current government to inflate inflation, to have a real problem with inflation as being a crisis in your home. And I don't think he took it far enough. I just don't think he took it far enough. And I think when the Liberals went on to say like, oh, but you'll be able to, do that. Like he was off and then Singh was off. I think this was an opportunity for Erin O'Toole, whether it was his turn to speak or not, to then just attack dog it until the section was over. And there was too much refinement on his part. Oh, and the other thing, while stupid, I think matters. Jagmeet Singh would look at the candidate he was talking to. Trudeau would look at the candidate he was talking to. Erin O'Toole only ever looked forward. It was odd. It was almost like he was in Edmonton and we brought him in virtually. It was odd. Didn't you find it odd? It was kind of unnerving at some point. Oh, yeah. Stop it. Stop.
Rob, you raised your hand there because then I'm going to go talk about housing with
I would just say,
Aiden
I think inflation, I think it's important in that I think lots of Canadians, especially conservative Canadians, are concerned about inflation. But I think the reason why O'Toole doesn't go more to bat on inflation is I think we've seen lots of from Pierre Poilievre, he bought his 2x4 in March, and he was like, this was $20, and you know what? Now it's at $2 again. It's a normal price because we're not facing real inflation, or at least we can't see if we are yet, because we're still in a supply crisis. We're still supply and demand are still very mismatched from the pandemic. So I think, maybe O'Toole, he didn't throw the barbs he needed to throw on inflation from a politics perspective, but I think maybe he didn't throw them because he didn't have the confidence he could throw them. Who wants to have their Pierre Poilievre
Canada? No way.
Moments.
Okay, Pierre Poilievre on his own island, but the Bank of Canada, the IMF, all these bodies have come out with formal reporting to say inflation is going to dog Canadians. It's going to be a real issue.
They've said inflation
you add
will
that
be
to ridiculous carbon
4%,
taxation, and you have
basic
household goods that are going to be an absolute challenge for Canadians.
Okay, guys, we're sounding like we're back in the debate here in Gatineau, Quebec.
And I just to get a bit meta, per what Aiden said at the very beginning of the show, I don't think this is the correct format to debate inflation either. But I don't. That's my take. Is I think. I don't think Erin O'Toole had the confidence that he could stand on those points, and that's why he didn't throw them.
I think they were just mismessaged.
Before I do throw it to Aiden here, I just want to say that we are sitting down with three amazing guests on the Cross Border Interview Podcast live broadcast of the post-debate. Robert Tremblay, who is a volunteer organizer with the Liberal campaign in Calgary Centre, Aiden Thoreau, the Fort Saskatchewan Sherwood Park NDP candidate, and Conservative Like Me podcast host, Jen Sanford. Aiden, I want to talk about housing for a second because this was a pointed question right to Mr. Singh about would you help young people getting a house, or would you help the seniors who are potentially looking at selling their houses to retire somewhere else? It seemed like he was wobbly there for a few minutes. In your opinion, did he do well, and did he answer the question that was asked?
Well, I want to first say I wasn't a big fan, and and I think Jen and I both had some couple of issues with Rosemary. Wasn't a big fan of how this question was asked. Frankly, it was framed as, "Do you support the young people or the old people? You can only pick one." And I think that was very disingenuous framing. I mean, the idea that only young people are the ones renting right now, only young people are the ones moving, only young people are the ones in the housing market. I think that's absurd. But and Jagmeet's answer was a little wobbly. I thought he could have gone a little harder. I thought he could have talked about, the affordable help. His affordable housing strategy isn't just for young people. This is about helping seniors. This is about lowering the cost in the housing market across the board. I mean, that is the point of an affordable housing strategy, and yeah, it was an odd question. He could have gone a little stronger, I think, in advocating for his main flagship proposal on housing, which is building 500,000 affordable housing units across the country.
This topic, like you said, it seemed like there was a lot of push and take from Miss Rosemary Barton on all the leaders, even the Liberals. I know some people might not think that Miss Barton is hard on Mr. Trudeau, but she did go after him after the true moderator almost forgot to let her ask Mr. Trudeau the question. Rob, I want to ask you the question about affordability and did Mr. Trudeau do damage to himself when he answered the issues around borrowing, around potentially having more cost of living increases here, or did he do what he needed to do to answer the questions?
So I think at this point in the debate, I think a lot of it was just kind of washing over me. So can you remind me kind of what you're thinking in Trudeau's answer?
Trudeau talked about how he, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because my mind's getting a little fuzzy right now as well. There was a lot of talk around inflation, but also how Mr. Trudeau has helped the people of Canada ensure that their cost of living doesn't increase. And right. Mr. Trudeau did talk about all the programs that he was introducing.
Yeah, and just correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not trying to play into what Jen was saying and just spit out talking points. But did Trudeau pivot? If just remind me if I'm correct, did Trudeau pivot to childcare on this point? I think if I remember correct, he did. I don't think he addressed housing as much.
I think he pivoted to childcare and talking about Mr. O'Toole's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that was probably the right way for him to pivot to. Their big play for affordability, to be frank, is on childcare, and I think that was the right thing to pivot to.
Okay, Jen. Oh, I thought you.
I would like to yield my time back to Aiden, actually, because I actually wrote down the second question that Rosemary Barton asked while Jagmeet Singh was trying to answer the first one, which I thought was super disingenuous. But she asked the question. I thought maybe Aiden could address this. There has been so much of a big focus around getting young people into housing, which I don't disagree with. But the question that always gets asked, and I think conservatives are trying to answer this question, is how do you push young people into the market while keeping the equity of existing homeowners to get the true value of their own home? How does the NDP actually reconcile that? Could you maybe just answer that? Because Jagmeet Singh certainly can't.
See, that is a good question. What I would say is that I do think the NDP does have I do think they do have a strong proposal to get young people into the housing market. In terms of a lot of what they're proposing, you can go into some of their platform proposals, doubling the first-time home buyers tax credit. I don't know if I have a good enough answer for that question. I must admit.
No, understandable.
Well, could you tell your leader?
I think
the tell your leader.
I think the NDP, would they not respond with 500,000 new rental units? Would they not say that would add downward pressure to housing prices?
But they also talk about home ownership. That's the thing, because I always think about rental market too, right?
True. But more renters. more renters means less buyers, but then more support for more first-time buyers balances that out. Would that not be the right answer from the NDP, in your opinion, Jen?
Well, in terms of in terms of lowering the cost of the housing market, that is the central point of national affordable housing strategy. I mean, 500,000 additional affordable renting units is sort of just icing on the cake in a sense. It provides immediate relief to a lot of families, but it also is going to lower the major costs of the housing market. I don't know if that was kind of the answer sort of to the question you were getting at. Again, I apologize.
I guess my frustration is that Jagmeet Singh is in Burnaby. And as someone who has just moved from the Lower Mainland, we know that the big issue there is foreign ownership. We've got condo towers in Vancouver that are completely empty but fully owned. And so when he talks about moving people into housing, I get it on the rental side. But when he talks about when he talks about ownership, the question is always, how are we going to pull all these people into home ownership without destabilizing those people that are trying to hold on to their existing home equity? And I think that I would love to see the NDP get really, really, really tight on that messaging. I actually think that would be, a great, and conservatives, we always want the NDP to be strong because it hurts the Liberals, right? Splits the vote nicely. So Aidan, please take to your homeland, your home leader, the idea that getting tight on the key messaging around home ownership, I think is really something that actually might have a tremendous amount of resonance, especially with young people in major markets like Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, even pockets of like Edmonton, and further west or east.
I just want to make sure that we get into the last subject here. The last subject, which was COVID-19, and let's be honest, I'm pretty sure everyone had tuned out by the time Evan Solomon had gotten up, because it became a who could talk over everyone else in the last 10 minutes of this debate, and it became even worse to manage and understand. I will give a sort of a brief moment to each one of you before we wrap this up. How did your leaders do on the issue around COVID-19? Let's start with Rob, and then we'll go to Aid, and then we'll go to Jen, and then we'll talk about the winners and losers. So, Rob, how did COVID-19 play for the Liberals in this debate?
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a little bit the same as what I did with the last question. So just to make sure I'm answering this correctly. So I remember Evan Solomon's question being kind of it was similar to the question to Jagmeet. It was, how are you going to pay for it, right? And I think Trudeau answered
how
that
are you
well.
going to pay for it, and how?
Now, none of the leaders have a credible plan for how they're going to pay for it at this point. And I think Trudeau, he didn't buy into that format, that framing. I think it's a bad framing for Trudeau. It frankly, for anybody but O'Toole, it's a bad framing. And even for O'Toole, it's probably not a great framing. So I think he did a good job in not buying into that and just saying, we're going to focus on recovering their economy. We're going to focus on moving Canadians forward out of the pandemic. And that was, I don't know, that's the right answer.
Aidan, Mr. Singh did talk about how he did help, or he did push for the Liberals to do more when it came to CERB, when it came to CRB. Was this moving the dial a little bit for them, or could he have gone a little bit further?
Well, I think you can always go a little bit farther, but I think it was really important that he brought that up, because here's the thing, CERB was a lifeline for many millions and millions of Canadians during this pandemic who lost their incomes through no fault of their own. People who lost their small businesses, and this plan only came around because the NDP held that balance of power and was able to get the Liberals to come to the negotiating table. Originally, what the Liberals had wanted to do was extend EI, which would have left millions of people completely uncovered. And then he, also brought up the fact that when they did negotiate on CERB, their Liberals' original proposal was $1,000. Well, I don't know about you, but if you lost your entire income for your family, $1,000 a month, the cost of living now, we've talked a little about inflation, that doesn't really cut it. And so, yeah, I think that was a really strong thing to attack him on.
Jen, how about yourself? Mr. O'Toole was asked point blank, what policies would he continue? And I think it became a fight between who was going to cancel what programs first between Justin Trudeau and Erin O'Toole. This is a losing issue no matter who you are. Did O'Toole win the night when he sort of didn't answer the question without answering the question?
Well, no, because at this point, and I did keep track, at this point, there were 14 attacks that were made against his 5 point plan, which is really all he comes to the table with. And 14 unchecked attacks at that point in a 2-hour debate, that sucks for anybody. That sucks no matter what party you're affiliated with. So once again, it was second verse, same as the first. We saw it all the way come back around to like who's driving the bus in your party. A lot of early attacks and easy attacks there. No surprise from the Prime Minister saying, how could you even talk about a credible plan on vaccination when people within your own party aren't even vaccinated and you won't make them be vaccinated? He's got to get out of this who is driving the bus on his own party so that he can talk about COVID recovery. He has some good things in his plan. The problem is that he crossed this sort of invisible meridian about an hour and 40 minutes into the debate and spent the last 20 minutes basically doing public relations for the plan. Canadians aren't going to finish the debate and be like, I got to get my hands on this plan that he kept repping for this entire debate. Canadians aren't going to go read the plan. So if you can't get the plan into 1 or 2 key messages, you've got a problem. And you know who could have taught you that? Stephen Harper. He did the very same thing, and that him so dearly in 2015. And then of course the pièce de résistance when he's like, I also read the Liberal plan, and on the page 14 they promised this and then they won't be able to do it. Great rep for someone else's plan. So I think by the time we got to COVID recovery, even though I think that there was such an abundance of key messaging for him, he was so off the rails on his messaging. I think he honestly just got tired. I honestly, so I'm really, really disappointed in my own leader in terms of how he addressed this COVID section. First of all, I think COVID should have gone up at the beginning because we're dealing with COVID right now, and I think he should have been far more prepared to answer the basics of the question being asked, which I do think on behalf of Evan Solomon was kind of a softball.
Rob, I'll let you answer, and then I'll give it to Aiden. Then I'll have to finish up this.
Okay, I was just going to respond to Jen. Was I supposed to respond to a question?
No, we already talked about that. Okay, so if you want,
all I was going to say is just to bring it full circle. Like, sounds good. Just to bring it full circle, Jen, do you think like O'Toole was fishing for kind of a closing statement, and he wasn't sure if he was going to get one, and that's just kind of where he went to in his head because he knew it was kind of getting to the end?
I do agree that everyone should have been given a closing statement just to wrap up the crazy because it was so off the rails by that point. And I do think obviously there should have been more than one debate so that we had a chance to really unpack these issues. I share Aiden's concern that housing should have been its own flipping debate, right? Because it falls into how we live and quality of life, right? Mm-hmm. Falls into affordability. I don't really know what happened there. I think that I don't really know what happened there.
And do you think he was thinking there's stuff I still got to get in and I got to get this in before the end of the debate? Like for example, I watched a lot of the Dem primary debates leading up to 2020. And a lot of those ones that they kind of started axing the closing statements. And I think in those ones, maybe justifiably, because they were all the same in like every single month. And
plus they had 20
those ones though, I always notice yeah, exactly. And they would ask the last question and everybody would just always pivot. No, like I'm going to go with my closing statement. I'm not going to answer the question.
Do you
think that's what O'Toole was doing in the last section?
You know what? I'm not sure because he did the same thing in the French debate the night before, right? It just, the last question sort of fell apart on him. So I don't know whether he was just trying to pivot into his strongest messages. I think he thought he was going to have more attack options. I think he might've underestimated how hard Jagmeet Singh was going to attack the Prime Minister. So maybe he was just kind of trying to find his footing, but the last question fell apart for him on the French debate last night. And I saw a little bit of the same tonight, a lot of the same tonight, actually.
Aiden, do you want to throw in your last words here?
I suppose on the last topic of COVID recovery, one thing I would have liked to have seen from Mr. Singh a little bit more was he went very hard attacking Trudeau, and fairly so, and I think that that had its benefits. It would have been nice to see him distinguish himself more as well from the other party leaders, particularly from Mr. O'Toole. I think he did a really good job of that in 2019 of distinguishing himself from both of them. But I felt in this, he was just acting as an opposition to the Prime Minister. And it would have been nice to see him kind of distinguish himself both from the Liberals and the Conservatives a little bit more. But again, like my friends here have said, it's that last topic was just madhouse. So.
Okay, so we are going to do a rapid fire round robin here for the last 3 questions, and I want your honest, and I want it within 30 to 45 seconds as the leaders did get, so that way we can get wrapped up here. Winners of the night. Who was the winner in your opinion? Rob, we'll start with you.
You know what? I should really have a better canned answer for this, but I guess like I'll just try to view this in context. I think O'Toole I think has ran like a pretty good campaign so far, or at least the campaign has gone well for him so far. And I think he had an opportunity to kind of really solidify that tonight, and he didn't. So I think I'll say in that light, Trudeau's the winner. They remain in the fight.
Aiden, how about yourself?
Well, it's firstly I have to say I'm just politically, policy aside, I do find it sort of impressive that Mr. O'Toole was able to. I mean, you look at where the polls were at the start of this election, leading up to it, and why it was called originally. And it looked like it was just going to be a liberal cakewalk, and he's sort of been able to salvage that situation for himself and his party, and kind of rebrand himself. In a pretty short period of time, that takes a lot of skill. As a communication student, I have to tip my hat to him a little there.
But winner of the night?
Yeah. In terms of the winner of the night, personally, again, I'm obviously biased, but I gotta give it to my boy, Jagmeet. I mean, look, I think there were a few areas where he was a little bit wobbly, or where he may have could have gone a little bit farther, or could have pulled it back a little. But overall, I think he did what he needed to do. He distinguished himself from the Liberals. He kind of broke through that lie that NDP and the Liberals are just the same thing. He actually brought up the fact that on many issues the Liberals and the Conservatives voted with each other in this last session of Parliament. I think he had a really strong night.
Miss Sanford, who won the debate tonight?
Without a doubt, Rosemary Barton. I don't know what party she's running for, but she's really aggressive. She's going to do great.
But the honest answer.
In all seriousness,
she's running a write-in campaign, ladies and gentlemen.
the write-in, yeah, no. In all seriousness, I don't think anybody did themselves any harm. I think everybody could have done better, but I have to give it to Annamie Paul. I thought that she really talked about how she herself had to climb over hell to be where she was. I think she held her ground really well. I think if you consider the weakness of her party platform still, because they really do run on environmental issues and they don't have a whole, like if you consider the lack of depth to her plan, she brought a real piece of substance to the debate and holding people accountable. One of the things we should all remark on is that she was the only candidate that was up there that when she spoke was not interrupted. And I think that speaks to the series. I'll be interested to now see what the Green Party is going to do with her, because she really did make her party proud this evening. And I think that there's got to be more to come from the internal politicking of that party.
They might actually pay for her ticket back to Toronto Centre.
Yeah, exactly. Put her on a bus.
Aiden, go for it.
I have one question actually, just in response to Jen. I agree with all of what you said there. Do you think, though, because you mentioned she wasn't interrupted, do you think if she was doing better in the polls, or if the other parties maybe perceived her as more of a political threat, do you think maybe she would have been interrupted there?
No.
And in contrast, I think she was interrupted quite a bit in the French language debate, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that is true. That is, I will give that to Rob.
I would say like maybe just one question, just to like kind of suss out Jen's answer too. Do you think Annamie did enough kind of in context with like the Greens? Like it's obviously they've had a tough year, but like, do you think she did enough to kind of turn that around? And like, if she didn't, should she still get the winner? Like, do you think?
Yeah, I think the big question here is who is everybody debating, right? I think a good amount of people on that stage were debating for the job of prime minister. Yves-François Blanchet was debating to prove that Quebec has to be part of all these debates and we all have to suck it up in the West. But I think Annamie Paul was really debating for her own job. She had a different goal to show her party that I can bring dignity and I can bring leadership and I can bring a voice that's crisp and clean to the debate stage, and everybody get out of my way to let me do that. So I think she was debating for different purposes, but she does have some strong candidates in this race that could hold on to a seat. And I think at the very least, we want to see the Green Party hold on to party status. And that feels so ironic to say, because the big issue here is climate. Right? It is such a big issue. And yet the Green Party, stands alone on the climate issue. And yet we're just hoping that they maintain party status, which for the record, I hope that they do.
Well, they would need 10 more seats to remain party status, so let's hope they
That-
can get
yeah,
that that magic
Let's hope they
12
can get
number.
there.
My very last question. What's next? What's next? What do the party leaders need to do between now and next Monday or the 20th? Because they have 11 days, with 10 days if the audio version comes out. Aiden, what does Jagmeet Singh have to do between now and September 20th to ensure that the momentum that he might have coming off of this debate continues, but also picks up more seats than the 24 he currently has?
Well, currently in the polls have the NDP projected to pick up a good chunk of seats. Jagmeet's, I think, really in a lot of ways, he's got to keep on doing what he's doing. But I think he also does have to distinguish himself a little bit more from the Conservatives that he's been doing, because the campaign seems to have been largely revolved around Justin Trudeau. And, in some writings, I think there's definitely benefits to that. But I think in terms of the broader perspective, I think he would benefit himself from really distinguishing himself, not just as an opposition party, but as a real substantive option, different from all the other guys.
Jen, what about Mr. O'Toole? What does he need to do between now and September 20th to make sure that he gets the keys to 24 Sussex on September 21st?
He's got to calm down. He's got to get on message. He's got to be able to talk about these big issues in a more saleable way. He can't say let's go to the plan. Everybody go check the plan. He's got to be able to talk about, this is the state of the union of where we are today. This is where trouble will brew. This is how I will mitigate trouble for you. And then he's got to get out to the West, and he's got to get out the vote early in early polling. He's got to sell to the West, where we have all these other fringe voices, the argument that I am your best chance to form government. I may not be your best choice. I may not be your first choice. I hear the drumbeat of all these other conservative-like parties, and I'm telling you, I have the best chance to be the prime minister. This cannot continue with this government. And he's got to start to hound on that message. He's got to go west in early polling, and then he's got to go east for election day.
Mr. Rob, what does Mr. Trudeau need to do to keep those keys and make sure Erin O'Toole becomes a one-term leader of the Conservative Party like Andrew Scheer?
Yep. So I think what Trudeau needs to do is he needs to recognize the Canadians, they care about stuff like climate change, they care about stuff like childcare, they care about getting out of this pandemic in a prompt manner. And I think what he really needs to convince Canadians is just really reiterate, I alone can get this done. A vote for the Conservatives risks progress, and a vote for the NDP risks the Conservatives. And I think that's really what he needs to lay in and just maintain and get back to 2015.
Awesome. We are now almost at the hour and a half mark, and I told Rob we would be 45 minutes, but here we are. For the 9 people who stayed with us the entire time, thank you so much for tuning in. To my listeners and to my viewers, greatly appreciate it. But I will say this, as I've said at every end of episode, please, 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 please get out, get educated, learn about all the candidates in your riding, and vote. Vote, vote. If you do not vote, I do not want to hear you complaining on after election day. I do not want to see you on Twitter. I do not want to see you complaining on Facebook, social media, TikTok, Snugglepuss, whatever the new social media platform is going to be in the next year and a half. But do get out and vote. Advanced voting starts on Friday, which is tomorrow, which is, for the audio version, it's today. Aiden, best of luck in the rest of your campaign. Rob, thank you so much for doing this. Jen, always a pleasure. Have yourself an excellent rest of the night, guys. And we will be back Saturday with the Green Party representatives for Calgary Forest Lawn and Calgary Shepherd. Talk to you later.